Welcome back. This is part 4 of our series on principled negotiation. So let's proceed. In this part of the series, we're going to talk about the third principle, creating options for mutual gain. If by this point in your negotiation you have followed the first two principles, you've separated the people from the problem, you have focused on interests and not positions, then you now have created the possibility for yourself to create options for mutual gain. It will be difficult to create options for mutual gain if you have been making the other party the problem and focusing on them, or if you've been pushing forward your bargaining position rather than your interest. But if you've done the first two things, then creating options for mutual gain becomes an enjoyable possibility for working together to come up with a solution that will work for both of you. Let's talk about that in more detail. As we talked about in the last series, looking at the example of the two men negotiating over a cow, or two companies negotiating over some land, creating options for mutual gain depends upon looking for compatible interests. You look for those areas where you have commonality and focus on those things rather than focusing on the differences. You want to begin to expand the pie, and by that I mean to address the problem of the limited good. I want to talk about that for a moment. If you were to think of a pie chart, all of the segments of the pie add up to 100% of the pie. Or let's say you're talking about a literal pie, and you're going to cut it up into 8 pieces because 8 people are going to have some of the pie. What if you want more pie? What you're going to have to do is cut yourself a larger piece, which is going to mean that other people have a smaller piece. That means you're taking away from someone else. If there's only one pie, that is an inevitable problem that you're going to face. This is the mentality that you have with positional bargaining. There's only a limited amount of success, there's only a limited amount of money, there's only a limited amount of good that we can spread around between all of us. So therefore, we're going to have to fight over that limited amount if we're going to get more of it. Now that's a problem in the marketplace. That's a problem in negotiating because it causes you to fight with each other. There are other options. What about the possibility of creating another pie? What about the possibilities of looking for more good? I mean, this is what happens in industry when somebody invents something new that nobody else has ever used before or seen before. They have invented some new good. They've come up with a new product, a new device, or a new service that suddenly people want. And what that does is it means that the person who's working in that company is not taking jobs away from somebody else. They've created an entirely new segment of jobs. It creates good. So in order to create options for mutual gain, we must get away from the idea that there is only one pie and we're going to have to fight each other for it. We're going to want to recognize and avoid some primary obstacles to mutual resolution. One of those is premature judgment, which is another way of saying we've already made up our minds about the way this is going to be resolved. We've already got in our head an exact idea of what the final agreement is going to look like, and we're not willing to consider other options. Well, isn't that another way of talking about positional bargaining then, essentially? So we want to open our minds, look at the judgments that we've already had before, and be willing to reconsider them. In fact, why not just throw them out the window and start with an open mind, a cooperative mind where you're working together? Another obstacle is staying within your comfort zones. Well, your comfort zones are the ways that you've done things in the past, the resolutions that you've known have worked in the past, but not every resolution or solution to a problem that you've used in the past is going to work for every problem in the future. Things change, people change, situations change. Old solutions don't always work for every future problem that we're going to have. But if we only stay within the range of solutions that we've used in the past, that is basically staying within our comfort zones and within the range of our prior experience. Frankly, people have had experiences that we have not had before, and if we go in with an open mind, we could possibly learn some things from the experiences of others. Another obstacle to finding mutual gain is uncooperative thinking, or the kind of thinking that says, the other person is responsible for solving their problem. I'm not going to worry about their problem. I'm only going to worry about my own. And that's an incredibly common perspective, and it's not helpful in a negotiation where you're looking for mutual gain. I want to talk about the economist who lived a couple hundred years ago. His name was Adam Smith. Adam Smith is regarded as the father, or one of the fathers, of modern economics. Adam Smith talked about the tension that exists in negotiation between pursuing personal gain and pursuing common good, or a solution that's good for everyone. He said that if people have only as their target finding a common good, then ultimately some people are going to end up left out, because there is no perfection. In other words, he's saying that it is necessary for each party to a negotiation, or each member of an economy, to be looking out for their own good. This is, in one sense, a foundation point of the capitalist system. Each person is supposed to be seeking for their own benefit. We cannot always throw out trust that people are going to find our best benefit for us. We need to be looking out for our own interest. But Adam Smith would say that we should not be looking for personal gain at the expense of common good, seeking personal gain at the expense of the gain of the other person. This is going to result in an environment where the fewer people are actually going to get the gain that they're looking for then, because some people are going to win and some people are going to lose. That throws you back into positional bargaining and in looking at the amount of good that there is to be had as limited. So to follow Adam Smith's principles then, each person should be looking out for their own interests, but also a resolution that is for the common good, that meets the interests of the others as well. In order to find the solution that produces mutual gain, identify all of those interests which are shared to establish the foundations of your discussion. Those will establish the foundations of a win-win solution. If you think of Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, looking for win-win solutions is also mentioned in that book, and you may be familiar with that. Identifying shared interests gets both parties onto the same side of the table. And you want to make these shared interests the bedrock of your foundation. If you start going into disputes or you start arguing over details, periodically stress and re-emphasize your shared interests as often as you need to, because then this continues to reinforce what are the benefits of reaching an agreement that is good for both parties. You'll want to use creative problem-solving strategies. We've talked about creative problem-solving strategies in a previous training. In this creative problem-solving, you want to use techniques like brainstorming. You want to put out as many ideas on the table as possible before you critique any of them. One idea might not be enough. Another idea might not be enough. But to put two ideas together and you might begin to find a solution that can work. So creative problem-solving strategies are very helpful for finding mutual gain. If you want to know more about that, you can go back and review the previous training that we looked at. You want to identify unique differences and explore how these can actually be an advantage. So we've looked at shared interests, but what about different interests? Different interests can actually be an advantage in a negotiation. There is the children's rhyme that says, Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. And so between the two of them, they licked the platter clean. If they were both looking out for the same interests always, they might end up fighting over who gets it, where a mutual solution might sometimes include the aspect of providing to each party that unique element that they're looking for. The examples we used last time of the two men fighting over the cow is a perfect example of exploring how your unique interests can be an advantage in the negotiation process. One man wanted the meat of the cow, the other man wanted the leather. One was a butcher, the other produced leather products. My guess is that if you were to look back on your own experiences, you could think of agreements that you'd reached where you and the other party were both interested in similar but different things, and how that has. My guess is that you've experienced this before. So as we wrap up this part of our series, here are the questions for you to think about. What similarities do you see between this step, this principle of creating options for mutual gain, and the creative solving process? Think about that more deeply. We just touched on it in this presentation, but there's a lot more that you can consider. Also, think about this question. What would you say to someone who has a limited pie perspective to open up their minds to new possibilities for mutual resolution? What kinds of arguments are convincing to you that a limited pie perspective is ultimately short-sighted or creates conflict? What arguments or reasoning might you use in talking to the other party in a negotiation that you're in to convince them that we want to get away from a limited pie perspective? Well, that's it for this section of the presentation. Thanks for listening in.